So today I thought I would try something a little bit different. I have been encouraging myself to break the rules, at least the kinds of rules that I set for myself, which are, in the end, pretty arbitrary, although they may give me some sense of control. The rules which said most episodes would be interviews, every 10th episode would be a personal reflection. I ended up breaking that rule a few episodes back when I didn't have an interview ready. And then I thought, I'm going to try experimenting with some different types of content in this podcast. So today, I am going to do what I originally was going to call a book report because I was reading a really interesting book over the weekend. And I thought I could talk about some of the ideas from that book. And then I thought I shouldn't call it a book report because I actually don't want to just cover all the key ideas in the book in a formal, structured way, in a way that I think a book report would normally be, which partly comes from having studied philosophy back in school, where when we would analyze a text, it was really quite formal and quite structured, and I didn't want to have to do that. It's more maybe exploring some of the ideas in this book that I thought were particularly interesting. So the book is called Art as Therapy. It was written by Alain de Botton and John Armstrong. It was published in 2013, which when I look at 2013, I always think that that's relatively recent, and then I forget sometimes we're already in 2022, so it's 9 years old. But I think there are some ideas that were new to me, at least, that would be interesting to talk about. And I'm going to start by reading the very last line of the book. The ultimate goal of the art lover should be to build a world where works of art have become a little less necessary. So let's take a step back now and see how the authors got there. One of the questions that de Botton and Armstrong explore in the book, where they start, is asking what art is for. And they talk about 7 different functions of art: remembering, hope, sorrow, rebalancing, self-understanding, growth, and appreciation. The authors approach each of these functions in an interesting way. The one that particularly caught my attention was rebalancing. And this is how they introduce the idea of rebalancing. Few of us are entirely well balanced. Our psychological histories, relationships, and working routines mean that our emotions can incline grievously in one direction or another. We may, for example, have a tendency to be too complacent or too insecure, too trusting or too suspicious, too serious or too lighthearted. Art can put us in touch with concentrated doses of our missing dispositions and thereby restore a measure of equilibrium to our listing inner selves. And what I thought was so interesting about this concept is that, first, yes, few of us are entirely well balanced. I can speak for myself. I am certainly far from entirely well balanced. But the idea that the art that we are drawn to, the art that we put up on our walls or surround ourselves with, or visit in museums or galleries or notice on the street, they represent or convey in some way the opposite of the emotions that we may feel. So, for example, if you tend to be, or you may be passing through a phase in your life when you're super stimulated or stressed or distracted, maybe you'll be attracted to calmer, more ordered, more peaceful pieces. And then the opposite, if you're lacking stimulation in your life, you may be more inclined to surround yourself or walk towards pieces that are dynamic and active and stimulating. And I have to say, what I particularly liked about reading this was that I always thought I was a little bit of a boring person because I'm often attracted to things that are quite linear, subdued colors, black and white photographs. But it was interesting to think about it in a different way in terms of if the squirrels in my head are running in their wheels most of the waking moments of my life and many of the ostensibly sleeping ones, it makes sense to me to think about why I might be drawn to calmer, more ordered, linear pieces. So that was an aha moment for me. And it might be interesting if you look around the space that you're in or the spaces that you visit regularly during the day and notice whether they perform any kind of a rebalancing function for you in terms of who you see yourself as and the types of pieces that you're drawn to. Rebalancing was one of 7 functions of art that the authors describe. And I won't go into details on the others, but what's interesting is that they then introduce a different way of judging or evaluating art. Art will be deemed not good or bad per se, but good or bad for us, to the extent that it compensates for our flaws, our forgetfulness, our loss of hope, our search for dignity, our difficulties with self-knowledge, and our longings for love. And then things get really interesting, because following the introductory section, there are 4 main chapters in the book: love, nature, money, and politics. And the authors go on to argue that instead of organizing the pieces in museums and galleries based on where the artist was from or the year that the work was created, instead of doing that, organize the pieces in a way that create an experience for the viewer as they pass through related to key themes like love and nature. And the coolest part is when they give examples of what a pathway through pieces of art about love, for example, might look like. What kinds of pieces would best illustrate how we can get better at love, or what it's like to be a good lover, or how to make love last. They don't just discuss examples of paintings of happy couples. One of the ways to make love last is not to take the other person for granted and to pay attention to a lot of the things that attracted you to that person in the first place. So one piece you might find in an exhibit on love could be Nocturne, the River at Battersea, painted by Whistler, with the caption, the authors suggest, "We had seen but not noticed the fog." It is a painting of shadowy images with a person on a boat in the foreground, boats in the distance against the backdrop of a city. And there was nothing new or remarkable about the fog itself, but the fact that Whistler had taken the time and the attention to paint it, to represent it in such detail. And the chapter on love in this book is filled with examples of pieces of art I would never have thought represented interesting things about the nature of love and what love looks like and feels like way beyond traditional representations of people in love. And the same for the chapters on nature, money, and politics. It would probably be helpful to read the book itself, to see some of the examples that the authors share with us on these topics. But it could also just be really interesting for you to look around and find examples of pieces of art that you think illustrate things about love or nature, other things that you think are important for us to feel about and know in different kinds of ways than we might typically approach them. And why is that so important? Because, as the authors write, the ultimate ambition of our engagement with art is that we should find ways to enact the values of art in the world. So for them, our interactions with art and the values that art illustrates to us are really indications of what we should be doing and thinking and feeling and how we should be acting in the world, how we should live our lives, how we can bring that which we value the most to life. In their view, art is the starting point, but its ultimate purpose is to guide us in how to make real values and ideals in our lives. We should fight to attain in reality the things art merely symbolizes, however graciously and intently. The ultimate goal of the art lover should be to build a world where works of art have become a little less necessary. Let me close now with a couple quick thoughts. One is more of an invitation, really. I'd love to hear what you thought of this episode. In particular, this book, Artist Therapy, and the thoughts of Alain de Botton and John Armstrong. And I'd also like to know what you think of this type of content more generally, in terms of covering the ideas from a book or a podcast episode or a video or a film. I'd like to know what your experience of this episode was like. And then I can't help but just reflect for a moment on what this was like for me. It was hard, actually, to, generally speaking, I don't approach these episodes in a very planned way. I try to follow the flow of what I'm thinking and what I'm feeling and talk about that in conversation with others or in my own, what I've been calling personal reflections. It was definitely different and a little more challenging to try to be true to the text and what I think were the intentions of the authors. And for that, I felt a little bit more pressure to think through what I was saying as I was saying it in a way that normally I might try to be more open and less didactic, maybe. But in any case, I invite your thoughts and your reactions, and thank you always for listening.